You know that feeling when you finally move into a place that feels right? That was us.
Fresh keys in hand, big smiles, boxes everywhere, and a whole lot of dreams. The neighborhood looked like something straight out of a TV commercial: kids on bikes, dogs being walked, sprinklers running at the perfect angle. It was like the kind of place where nothing bad ever happens.
Spoiler alert, I was so wrong.
When we first moved in, I honestly thought we'd hit the jackpot. The streets were clean, the houses all matched like they were built by the same perfectionist, and every lawn looked like it had its own gardener. Even the mailboxes looked like they had a dress code. My wife said, "This place feels peaceful," and I nodded like, yeah, we could totally live here forever.
I should have knocked on wood.
The HOA, the famous Homeowners Association, seemed nice at first.
You know that kind of fake nice that feels like a smile hiding a frown? Yeah, that. They sent us a welcome letter that said, "We're so glad to have you in our community.
Please review our rules to help keep our neighborhood beautiful." The letter had more pages of rules than our mortgage had terms.
Still, I thought, okay, how bad can it be? Cut your grass, don't paint your house pink, simple stuff, right? The HOA president, though, that's where things got interesting.
His name was Bob. Well, let's call him Bob because, honestly, he looked like every Bob you've ever met. Gray hair, tucked in polo shirt, and that look of authority that made you want to tuck your shirt in too.
Bob was always outside. Not doing anything, just watching. He'd walk around with a clipboard like he was running the FBI of front lawns.
Sometimes I'd catch him standing at the end of our driveway, pretending to check for weeds.
Bro was checking for reasons.
The rest of the neighborhood was a mix of Stepford vibes and subtle tension. Everyone waved, but it was that kind of wave where their smile didn't reach their eyes.
You'd see curtains move when you pulled into your driveway. Kids would whisper, "Don't step on Mr. Bob's grass," like it was sacred ground.
And heaven forbid you leave your trash can out 5 minutes past collection time. The HOA Facebook group would light up like a crime scene. At first, we tried to fit in. My wife joined the community gardening club. I showed up at an HOA meeting once.
Never again. The moment I walked in, it felt like I'd entered a secret society.
They were arguing about what shade of beige was acceptable for fences. One guy literally said, "Too creamy looks tacky." I'm sitting there thinking, it's a fence, not a wedding cake. Meanwhile, our kids were just being kids. They'd play basketball in the driveway, sometimes their ball would roll into a neighbor's yard, and I'd have to chase after it.
Nothing major. We even adopted a rescue dog, Max, sweetest golden retriever ever, but apparently, Max's barking disrupted the community peace. Yeah, someone actually wrote that in an HOA complaint. We tried to laugh it off at first. My wife would say, "Don't take it personally. They just like order." But you could feel the tension growing. The friendly smiles got tighter.
The notes from the HOA started coming more often, little reminders about community standards. One even said, "Your trash bins were visible from the street for 13 minutes after pickup."
13 minutes.
I didn't know whether to laugh or salute them for their precision timing.
The funny thing is, I actually liked the neighborhood, the trees, the quiet mornings, the way the sunsets hit the rooftops. It really was beautiful.
But beauty can be deceiving, especially when it's hiding a bunch of clipboard-carrying enforcers ready to pounce if your grass grows an inch too tall. Then one day, I noticed Bob and 2 other board members standing across the street, talking and pointing toward our house.
You ever get that gut feeling that something's off? That was it. I waved, they didn't wave back. Just turned around and walked away. My wife asked, "What was that about?" I said, "No idea, but I don't like it." Looking back, that was the moment everything shifted.
The calm before the storm. The HOA had their eyes on us, and they were about to make sure we knew it. At that time, I still thought all their drama would stay on paper: warning letters, maybe a few annoying emails.
But I was wrong. So wrong.
Because just a few weeks later, something happened that I never imagined in a quiet, suburban neighborhood.
The HOA called 911 on my family. Yeah, you heard that right. The same people who handed us a welcome basket with cookies and a list of approved paint colors actually called the cops on us. And that was when things got real. It started small, so small I almost didn't take it seriously. One afternoon, I opened the mailbox and saw a letter from the HOA. Nothing new, they loved sending out flyers about community pride and upcoming meetings, so I didn't think much of it. But this one looked different. The envelope had notice of violation stamped in bold red letters like I'd been caught doing something illegal. I opened it, and right there at the top it said, "Your trash cans were visible from the street for approximately 10 minutes past the designated time." 10 minutes. 10. I stood there in my kitchen reading that line over and over like maybe I'd missed something. I even checked the date, maybe it was April Fool's? Nope. Dead serious. I actually laughed out loud. "Babe." I yelled to my wife, "We're officially criminals, the trash can was out too long." She rolled her eyes and said, "I told you Bob was watching." At first, it was funny. We joked about it at dinner. I told the kids, "We're living under surveillance now, keep those trash cans in line." But underneath the laughter, there was this weird feeling creeping in. Someone actually timed how long our trash cans were outside. Like, who does that? A few days later, I ran into Bob, the HOA president, while walking Max. He gave me that tight smile of his and said, "We try to keep everyone accountable here. It's what makes our community special." I smiled back, but it wasn't the friendly kind. "Yeah, special's one word for it," I said. You could tell he didn't like that. His smile twitched a bit, and he said, "Rules are rules." We all agreed to follow them when we moved in. And that's when it hit me, this guy wasn't just enforcing rules, he lived for them. You could see it in his eyes. He got joy from it, like the HOA was his personal kingdom and we were just his subjects. After that, the letters started coming more often. One said our lawn was slightly uneven in color. Another said Max barked excessively during daylight hours. Daylight hours. What's he supposed to do, hum quietly? I remember one morning, I walked outside to mow the lawn, and one of the board members, this lady named Carol, stopped her car right in front of our house. She leaned out her window and said, "Make sure you're cutting at the correct height. HOA requires 3 inches. 3 inches. She actually said that. I just nodded, but in my head, I was thinking, you people need hobbies. The gossip started next. You could feel it in the air, the long stares, the whispered conversations when you passed by. One of our neighbors, Mrs. Jenkins, an older lady who'd lived there for years, caught me outside one evening. She looked around before speaking and said quietly, "Be careful. They've done this before." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then said, "The last family that didn't comply, they made their life miserable until they moved out. Letters, complaints, even calls to the city." I laughed nervously, thinking she was exaggerating. "All that, over grass?" She just shook her head and said, "It always starts small." Then she walked away. That stuck with me. It always starts small. And sure enough, over the next few weeks, I noticed little things. The HOA patrol car, yes, they actually had one, started driving by our house more often. Bob would slow down when passing, pretending to check his clipboard. Sometimes I'd look out my window and see Carol taking photos of people's yards like she was on some kind of suburban safari. It was weird, but I still brushed it off. I figured they were just being overly strict, maybe a little power-hungry, but harmless. Then came the second notice. This one wasn't about trash cans or grass. It said, "Unapproved items visible in driveway." Unapproved items. Turns out, they were talking about my kids' bikes, the ones leaning against the garage for maybe half an hour after school. At that point, I was half laughing, half annoyed. Like, is there a secret HOA camera hidden in my mailbox? Do they sit around on walkie-talkies like, Unit 3 spotted a scooter at large, move in? My wife told me to let it go, but the more I thought about it, the stranger it felt. This wasn't about rules anymore, it was about control. The way Bob talked to me, the tone of the letters, the gossip, it was like they were testing how far they could push. And deep down, I started to wonder if this is how they act over trash cans and bikes. What happens when something real goes wrong? I didn't know it yet, but that question was about to get answered. And the answer? Way louder and way messier than I ever expected. It was one of those perfect Saturdays, blue skies, warm breeze, burgers on the grill. We'd been planning a small family barbecue for weeks. Nothing crazy, just my parents, my brother and his kids, and a couple of cousins. You know, regular weekend family stuff. The smell of barbecue filled the air, the kids were laughing in the backyard, and for once, I wasn't thinking about HOA letters or Bob's clipboard patrol. Just good food, good company, and good vibes. Even Max, our golden retriever, was having the time of his life running around with the kids, chasing bubbles. We had music playing, nothing wild, just a chill playlist. Old school hits, some country, a bit of classic rock. Volume low enough that you could still talk over it. The grill was sizzling, my brother was flipping burgers like he was on a cooking show, and my dad was giving his usual back in my day speech. It was one of those rare, peaceful afternoons that make you forget about everything else. Then, the peace ended. I was in the middle of passing my mom a plate when I saw a familiar figure walking up the driveway, clipboard in hand, polo shirt tucked in as always. Yep. Bob. He wasn't smiling this time. You could see the steam coming out of his ears from 10 feet away. Behind him, Carol, the 3-inch grass lady, trailed along with a camera phone ready like she was filming evidence for CSI, Suburbia. Bob stopped right at the edge of the yard, hands on his hips, and said in his official voice, "Excuse me. What's going on here?" I blinked, holding a plate of ribs like, "What does it look like, Bob?" "We're not launching fireworks. It appears," he said, scanning the scene like a security guard, "that you're hosting an unapproved event. We've had complaints about noise and parking violations." I turned to look at the street. 2 of my relatives' cars were parked along the curb. Nothing blocking driveways, nothing illegal. Just parked. You know, like cars do. I laughed a little and said, "Bob, it's just a small family cookout. We're not throwing a block party." He didn't laugh back. Not even a smirk. "All gatherings over 6 individuals are to be pre-approved by the HOA board," he said, like he was reciting the Constitution. "And amplified music is prohibited without prior notice." Now, this music wasn't amplified. It was coming from a small Bluetooth speaker sitting next to the grill. But I could tell there was no point arguing. Bob didn't come to talk, he came to make a point. Carol was standing behind him, snapping photos of everything: the grill, the kids, the parked cars. I swear she even took a picture of Max. My cousin whispered, "Bro, are they for real right now?" I put my plate down and tried to stay calm. "Bob, I get that you have rules, but this is literally just my family hanging out. No one's causing trouble. You're welcome to grab a burger if you want." He looked at me like I'd just insulted his ancestors. "That won't be necessary," he said coldly. "You're in direct violation of multiple community guidelines. I'll be reporting this to the board immediately." Then he turned to Carol and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "If they don't comply, we'll escalate." And just like that, he stormed off, clipboard clutched like a sword, Carol trotting behind him snapping one last photo of the grill smoke, like it was evidence of criminal activity. For a few seconds, everyone was silent. Then my dad chuckled and said, "Wow. That guy needs a hobby." My brother laughed. The tension broke a little, and we just shrugged it off. I figured that was the end of it. Bob would go home, file his little report, and we'd get another letter in the mail saying unauthorized gathering or something ridiculous. But Mrs. Jenkins, the neighbor who'd warned me before, came walking by later that evening. She leaned over the fence, looked around nervously, and whispered, "You might want to wrap it up soon. When Bob says escalate, he means it." I laughed, trying not to take it too seriously. "You mean, what, another violation notice?" She shook her head. "No. He's called the cops before." I stared at her, trying to decide if she was joking. "For a barbecue?" She just gave me this sad little smile and said, "He doesn't like being told no." Then she walked away. By that point, the sun was setting, the food was almost gone, and everyone was starting to pack up anyway. The whole Bob incident had become a running joke. My cousin even said, if he calls the cops, I'll give them a burger too. We laughed. We really thought it was just empty talk. But about 20 minutes later, as we were cleaning up, I heard something in the distance, faint at first, then getting louder. Sirens. At first, I thought maybe they were heading somewhere else. It's a safe neighborhood, nothing ever happens here. But the sound kept growing, closer and closer. My wife looked at me, her smile fading. Wait, are they coming here? And as the flashing red and blue lights turned onto our street, my stomach dropped. We didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything changed. The first thing I saw were the flashing red and blue lights bouncing off the houses. You know that instant feeling in your gut like something's wrong, but your brain hasn't caught up yet? That was me. I stepped out onto the porch, spatula still in my hand, and just froze. 2 police cars. Not 1, 2. Both parked right in front of our house, lights spinning like we were in some kind of crime documentary. My kids ran up behind me, peeking out the door. Dad, what's happening? My youngest asked. My wife came rushing out, her eyes wide. The music was off now, everyone dead quiet, and all you could hear was the low hum of the sirens. The officers got out, calm, professional, but you could tell they were already confused. One of them, a tall guy with kind eyes, walked up and said, "Evening, sir. We got a call about a disturbance." I blinked. "A what?" He looked down at his notepad. Caller said there was loud noise, possibly a party, maybe some sort of confrontation. Behind him, I could see the neighbors standing on their lawns pretending to water plants or check mail. Everyone watching. And of course, standing across the street with his arms crossed and a smug look on his face, Bob. Clipboard in hand. Carol beside him, filming everything like she was making her big documentary debut, Neighborhood Chaos, The Untold Story. I felt my face heat up, part anger, part embarrassment. I took a breath and said, "Officer, this isn't a party. It's just my family. We were having a small cookout. Burgers, kids, that's it. Nothing crazy." He glanced past me into the yard, saw my parents sitting quietly, my brother holding a half-eaten hot dog, the kids clutching juice boxes. My wife still had a plate of potato salad in her hands like she didn't know what to do with it. The officer raised an eyebrow. "So, this is the disturbance?" "Apparently," I said, trying not to laugh out of disbelief. He looked around again, then leaned in slightly and said under his breath, "I'm guessing this has something to do with that guy over there," and nodded toward Bob. I sighed. Bingo. The officer chuckled, then turned back to his partner. False alarm. Again. That word "again" told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't Bob's first time dialing 911 over nonsense. Still, they had to go through the motions. "We'll just take a quick look and make sure everyone's okay," the second officer said politely. So they walked around the yard, nodded to my parents, even gave Max a few pets. The kids had stopped crying by then, but they were still clutching my wife's legs, eyes wide like we'd just been invaded. The taller officer came back to me and said, "Sir, this looks completely fine. I'm sorry you had to deal with this." He shook his head. "We get calls like this sometimes, usually from overzealous HOAs." Overzealous was the nicest word he could have used. I looked across the street. Bob was still standing there, phone in hand, staring like he was expecting me to be arrested for grilling without a permit. When the officer waved at him and shouted, "All good here," I swear I saw Bob's face twitch. He turned around and stormed off without saying a word. Carol stayed behind a moment longer, still recording, probably hoping something dramatic would happen. When she realized it wasn't going to, she slowly lowered her phone and scurried off like a kid who'd been caught. The officers apologized one more time and said, "You folks enjoy your evening." I thanked them, even offered them some burgers. They laughed but declined. One of them said quietly, "If it happens again, just call us first. Saves everyone some trouble." When they left, the street finally went quiet again. But it didn't feel the same. The fun, easygoing vibe from earlier was gone. My kids didn't want to play anymore. My mom looked shaken. My dad muttered, "All this over some barbecue, unreal." I stood there in the driveway, watching the red and blue lights fade away, and all I could think was, how did we get here? I mean, what kind of neighborhood calls 911 over family dinner? What kind of grown adults use the police as their personal complaint line? Across the street, Bob's porch light flicked on. You could just feel him watching, waiting. That was the moment something in me snapped. I wasn't scared anymore, I was mad. Not the yelling kind of mad, but the quiet, fed-up kind of mad that sits in your chest and starts to burn. I turned to my wife and said, "That's it. Enough is enough." She nodded. "What are you going to do?" I looked back at Bob's house and said, "I'm going to show them they picked the wrong family to mess with." The next morning, I woke up thinking maybe, just maybe, the whole 911 fiasco was over. Maybe Bob had gotten it out of his system, the HOA would chill, and we could go back to pretending this neighborhood was normal. Yeah, no. When I walked out to grab the mail, there it was, another envelope from the HOA, that same red notice stamp glaring up at me like a warning label. I already knew it wasn't going to be good. I opened it right there on the porch. Dear homeowner, you are in violation of multiple community standards, including but not limited to unauthorized gathering, excessive noise, improper street parking, and creating a public disturbance. A public disturbance. For grilling burgers and playing a little music. I couldn't help but laugh, one of those bitter, disbelieving laughs. The letter even mentioned law enforcement involvement, like I'd hosted a full-blown riot. By the time I finished reading, my wife was standing behind me. "You've got to be kidding me," she said. I handed her the paper. They really called the cops, and now they're acting like it's our fault. 2 days later, another letter came, this one threatening fines. Failure to comply may result in daily penalties of up to $250. Then came another about improperly parked guest vehicles. They were basically turning every detail of that cookout into a laundry list of crimes. It felt like they were trying to drown us in paperwork and intimidation. And it worked, at least a little. The tension in the house started to grow. My wife was furious, constantly snapping at every new letter. "Why can't they just leave us alone?" she'd say. The kids, on the other hand, were scared. Every time they saw a police car drive by, they'd run to the window and ask, "Are they coming for us again?" That part hit hard. No kid should be afraid of living in their own home. Then there were the neighbors. Before all this, people would wave, chat about lawn care, compliment Max. After the police incident? Silence. It was like we'd been put on some kind of unspoken blacklist. Neighbors who used to smile now crossed the street to avoid eye contact. Kids who used to play with ours suddenly weren't allowed to come over anymore. One guy I talked to a few times at the mailbox pulled me aside and whispered, "Hey man, just be careful. The HOA doesn't like when people make waves." Make waves? I said. They called 911 on a barbecue. He shrugged. I'm just saying, they've made people's lives hard before. It's easier to keep your head down. That's when it really sank in. This wasn't about rules. It wasn't about grass height, trash cans, or parking spaces. It was about control. Power. Keeping everyone scared enough to obey without question. And I wasn't playing that game. So, I decided to start fighting back carefully. I bought a big folder and started documenting everything. Every letter, every violation, every ridiculous accusation. I even printed screenshots of emails and photos from my security camera showing Bob and Carol lurking near our driveway with their clipboards. Whenever they stopped by to inspect, I'd walk outside with my phone recording in plain sight. "Everything okay today?" I'd say with the calmest voice I could manage. They hated that. The camera made them uncomfortable, like sunlight hitting vampires. One day, Bob actually said, "You don't have permission to film me." I smiled. "I don't need permission, this is my property." He glared at me like I'd just broken the HOA's sacred oath. Inside the house, though, things weren't as easy. My wife was stressed all the time. She stopped sitting outside because she said it felt like we were being watched, and honestly, she wasn't wrong. Sometimes I'd catch Bob driving by slowly, pretending to check mailboxes that weren't even his. The kids didn't want to play in the yard anymore. My son asked, "What if they call the police again?" I didn't even know how to answer that. How do you explain to a kid that grown adults are waging war over barbecue smoke and bicycles? But beneath all the frustration, something else started to grow: determination. Every ridiculous letter, every silent neighbor, every power trip from Bob and his clipboard just made me more sure of one thing: they were trying to break us. And I wasn't about to let that happen. They could send all the warnings they wanted. They could gossip, fine, threaten, whatever made them feel powerful. But I wasn't backing down anymore. Because now, I had proof. And soon, I was going to use it. After the whole 911 circus and the flood of letters, I decided I wasn't just going to sit there and take it anymore. If Bob and his clipboard army wanted to play this game, fine, but I was going to learn the rules better than they did. So I did what any stubborn homeowner would do: I started digging. It began one late night after everyone had gone to bed. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, a cup of coffee, and that growing folder of HOA nonsense. I typed "homeowner rights versus HOA" into Google, and before I knew it, I was deep into forums, state codes, and legal guides. The more I read, the more I realized just how far these associations could push and how often they went too far. Turns out, HOAs aren't all-powerful. There are laws, real laws, that limit what they can do. They can't harass, they can't selectively enforce rules, and they sure as heck can't weaponize the police just because they don't like your grill smoke. But most people never question them. They just pay their dues and stay quiet because it's easier that way. Not me. Not anymore. I started looking into our specific HOA, the Oakwood Hills Homeowners Association. On the surface, it sounded nice. Professional website, lots of talk about community values and preserving harmony. But when I looked closer, it was a mess. Financial records that didn't add up, board meeting minutes that mysteriously skipped certain topics, and get this, multiple complaints filed with the state HOA office. That's when I found it: Bob's name. There he was, listed as president not just of our HOA, but of two others in the past decade. And both of those neighborhoods? They'd kicked him out. One had filed an internal complaint for abuse of authority. The other had forced a board resignation after residents accused him of harassment and misuse of funds. It was all public record, tucked away in the kind of government PDFs no one ever reads. But I read them. Every single line. Suddenly, everything made sense. The micromanaging, the power trips, the obsession with control. Bob wasn't protecting the neighborhood, he was feeding off it. The next day, I decided to start talking to people. Carefully. Quietly. I started with Mrs. Jenkins, the same neighbor who'd warned me before. When I told her what I'd found, she nodded like she'd known all along. "That man's been trouble since day one," she said. "But most folks are too scared to cross him. They think he'll ruin their lives." "Has he tried?" I asked. "Oh, honey," she said, lowering her voice. "He already has. Last year, the Millers put up a small shed within HOA rules, by the way, and Bob fined them until they tore it down. The Petersons had guests park overnight once. He reported them to the city for zoning violations. That was just the beginning. Once word got around that I was asking questions, a few other homeowners reached out. One guy named Derek, who lives 2 streets over, invited me for coffee. He'd been fined hundreds of dollars for failing to edge his lawn properly. Another neighbor showed me photos of Bob and Carol standing on her driveway, taking pictures while she was at work. It was like the floodgates opened. Everyone had a story. Everyone was angry. But no one had ever pushed back until now. We started meeting quietly, usually in garages or backyards, like we were planning a secret mission. We compared letters, emails, timelines, and slowly started connecting the dots. The pattern was obvious. Bob and his board were targeting anyone who questioned them, spoke out, or didn't follow their every demand. One night, as we sat around Derek's garage with a bunch of printed letters spread out on a folding table, I said, "You know what this looks like? A power play. Not about rules, not about noise, about control." Everyone nodded. Mrs. Jenkins leaned back and said, "Exactly. The 911 call wasn't about safety. It was about scaring you, sending a message to the rest of us." That hit hard. Because she was right. They hadn't called the police to protect the community. They did it to intimidate my family. To remind everyone what happens when you don't fall in line. But the thing about intimidation? It only works when people stay afraid. And now, for the first time, people weren't afraid anymore. They were angry. They were ready. So I told them, if they want to play dirty, fine. We'll play smart. We'll use their own rules, their own words, their own system, and we'll show everyone what they're really doing. That night, I closed my laptop, looked at the growing pile of evidence, and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: control. They'd wanted me to stay scared. But all they'd done was wake me up. Up until that point, the HOA had been calling the shots, the letters, the threats, even the 911 stunt. But once I realized what they were really doing, something inside me flipped. I wasn't going to let them bully me, or anyone else, into silence anymore. It was time to turn the tables. The first move I made was simple and completely legal. I filed a formal complaint with the local police department. I still had the body cam footage from the day they showed up, the reports, and even the timestamped HOA notice that followed. I explained everything: the false 911 call, the harassment, the intimidation. The officer at the front desk looked almost relieved as I spoke, like this wasn't the first time they'd heard about neighborhood power games. He took my statements seriously. "If they use 911 for anything other than a legitimate emergency," he said, "that's misuse of emergency services. It's not a small thing." I walked out of that station feeling like the air was lighter. For the first time, the weight wasn't all on me. Next, I went one step higher: the state HOA Oversight Division. I'd gathered weeks of documents, photos, emails, and even testimonies from other residents who'd been harassed. I spent hours putting together a clean, professional complaint, factual, calm, and loaded with evidence. No rants, no emotion, just the truth, organized in black and white. Then I hit submit. That single click felt like the first real punch I'd thrown in this whole fight. But I wasn't done. The next day, I made a post in the community Facebook group, the same one the HOA board always used to post reminders about garbage cans and lawn height. I kept it short, respectful, and straight to the point. "Hey neighbors, just to clear up some confusion, there was no emergency at my house the day the police were called." The officers confirmed it was a misunderstanding. Unfortunately, it appears the call was made by someone from our HOA without cause. I've filed the proper reports and will continue to handle it through the right channels. Please remember, no one deserves to feel unsafe in their own home. No accusations. No finger pointing. Just facts. Within an hour, the post had dozens of comments. People were shocked and curious. Some asked questions, others shared their own stories of being targeted. A few even apologized for believing the rumors the board had spread. By that evening, my inbox was full. Neighbors who had been silent before were finally speaking up. They'd had enough of the board's bullying too. It was like pulling a thread that made the whole sweater start to unravel. Then came the cherry on top: an email from Bob, the HOA president himself. Subject line: cease and desist notice. He accused me of defamation, false statements, and community disruption. It was written in that same pompous, over-official tone he always used, full of capital letters and legal jargon he clearly didn't understand. The last line read: "If you continue spreading misinformation, the HOA will be forced to pursue legal action." I almost laughed. Because I knew, and he knew, that I hadn't spread anything but the truth. So I did exactly what I trained myself to do these past few weeks: I documented it. Screenshot, date, backup. Then I calmly replied. Thank you for your email. I will be happy to provide copies of all statements, reports, and evidence to your legal counsel should you choose to proceed. Please direct any further communication through official HOA channels. Translation: I'm not scared of you anymore. And that's when I knew I had him. The very next week, the neighborhood buzzed with questions. Someone requested an emergency meeting. A few residents started looking into the HOA's finances, and guess what? Things didn't add up. The man who had once controlled every conversation in the neighborhood was suddenly on the defensive. His grip was slipping, and everyone could see it. And me? I stayed calm. I didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't stoop to his level. I just kept documenting, saving, and smiling when I waved to my neighbors. Because now, the truth wasn't buried in my inbox, it was out in the open. They'd called 911 to intimidate me. But now, it was their turn to answer the call. I knew the HOA wouldn't go down without a fight. I just didn't expect them to unravel this fast or this loud. A week after my Facebook post went viral around the neighborhood, I got another letter from the HOA. Well, not really a letter, more like a 5-page rant disguised as an official notice. It accused me of defamation, harassment of board members, and my favorite, creating division within the community. Right, because I was the problem, not the folks who called 911 on a backyard barbecue. They claimed I owed new fines, $250 for public disturbance, $100 for unauthorized guests, and another $150 for online misconduct. That last one made me laugh out loud. Online misconduct? What was this Facebook court? Still, it was clear they were panicking. When people in power feel that grip slipping, they usually double down. I didn't panic this time. I took a deep breath, pulled out my binder of neatly labeled documents, every email, every photo, every text, and started looking for legal advice. I found a local attorney who specialized in homeowner rights. The guy had the calmest voice I'd ever heard. I explained the whole mess to him, from the 911 call to the cease and desist email, and he just nodded the whole time, jotting down notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Yeah, I've seen this before. Small-time HOA boards acting like mini dictators. Don't worry, we'll handle this professionally." That one sentence felt like a rescue mission. He drafted a response letter to the HOA, short, sharp, and absolutely devastating in its politeness. It started with, "Our client has complied with all community rules and has been subjected to targeted harassment and misuse of HOA authority." Then it went on to remind them that filing false emergency reports, issuing baseless fines, and attempting to silence homeowners online could all have legal consequences. The ending line was my favorite. "Any further direct communication or retaliatory actions will be viewed as continued harassment and may result in civil action." Basically, lawyer speak for, try me. I sent the letter through certified mail and waited. For a few days, things went quiet. Too quiet. Then I started hearing whispers, not from the board, but from the neighbors. Turns out, the HOA president had been in damage control mode, calling an emergency board meeting that turned into a shouting match. A friend of mine who lived across the street said, you could hear them arguing through the clubhouse windows. Apparently, a few board members had finally had enough. They'd been uneasy about how far things had gone, the police call, the fake fines, the public embarrassment. One of them even reached out to me privately and said, "For what it's worth, not all of us agree with what's happening. This isn't what an HOA is supposed to do." That message meant more than I can explain. Because up until then, it felt like I was fighting the entire neighborhood. But now I knew cracks were forming. Meanwhile, the president tried one last desperate stunt, restricting my access to the community pool and clubhouse pending review. The problem? I had already paid all my HOA dues. That's when my lawyer sent another letter, shorter this time, but even colder. "You are in direct violation of your own bylaws. My client's access will be restored immediately." 2 days later, the pool gate magically started working again. The president, however, stopped waving when he saw me. He used to walk around like he owned the place, clipboard in hand, chest puffed up like a mall cop. Now, he barely made eye contact. The tension in the neighborhood was thick. Some people supported me openly, others stayed quiet but smiled when they saw me walking the dog. And a few still clung to the HOA president's version of the story, but even they seemed unsure now. The power shift had begun. The man who once tried to find me 4 trash cans visible for 10 minutes was now scrambling to hold his board together. And I was no longer the easy target he thought I was. Because once you know your rights, their threats start sounding less like power and more like noise. It took a few weeks, but when the knock finally came on my door, I knew exactly what it was about. A local police officer and a county investigator stood there, polite but serious. They asked if I had time to talk about the 911 incident. Oh, I had time. I'd been waiting for this moment since the day those flashing lights pulled up in front of my house for a barbecue. We sat at the kitchen table while I handed them a neatly labeled folder, printouts, screenshots, emails, timestamps, the works. I'd basically built my own case file. The officer flipped through it and let out this quiet whistle. "You've been thorough," he said. I smiled. Let's just say I learned fast. They explained that they were conducting a formal review of the HOA's 911 call, after multiple residents had filed complaints about the board's behavior. Apparently, I wasn't the only one tired of the nonsense. My quiet little neighborhood had become the talk of the town. Over the next week, the investigation spread wider than anyone expected. The county's legal department got involved, reviewing the HOA's actions under the Misuse of Emergency Services statute. It turns out, when you call 911 and make up a disturbance to scare someone, that's not just petty. It's potentially criminal. The report they eventually compiled was beautiful. Dry and technical, sure, but beautiful. It stated, in official language, that the HOA's 911 call was unsupported by evidence of disturbance and appeared to be motivated by personal bias and intimidation rather than genuine concern for safety. Translation: they lied to the police just to make me look bad. And now, it was biting them back hard. The HOA board received a formal notice of investigation. There were whispers about potential fines, required board training, and even the possibility of a recall vote. When that news hit the neighborhood group chat, things exploded. Residents were furious. People who had been afraid to speak up before were suddenly brave. Comments poured in like, "I knew something was off. They tried to pull that same stunt with me last year. It's about time someone stood up to them." Meanwhile, I stayed quiet online. No bloating, no told you so. Just calm silence. Because at this point, the facts were speaking louder than I ever could. And the facts were brutal. Apparently, during the 911 call, the HOA president told dispatch there was a large, unruly gathering causing public disturbance. But when officers arrived, they found exactly what I'd told them: a family cookout with kids, music, and burgers on the grill. The report even included one officer's note that made me laugh out loud when I read it later. No disturbance observed. Friendly environment. Good food smell. It was like justice with a side of barbecue sauce. When the findings went public at the next HOA meeting, I almost felt bad for the president. Almost. He walked in still trying to fake confidence, but everyone could see it. The arrogance was gone, replaced by that twitchy, defensive energy of someone who knows they're cornered. Neighbors started asking direct questions. Why did you call the police on a family gathering? Why did you tell us it was a safety issue? Why are we getting fined because of your bad judgment? The man who once strutted around with a clipboard suddenly couldn't finish a sentence without tripping over his words. I sat quietly in the back row, not saying a word. Just observing. Because the truth didn't need me to defend it anymore, it was out in the open, on paper, stamped and signed by the county. The HOA president's mask was gone. The calm, by-the-book leader image had completely crumbled. He wasn't protecting the community, he was using it as a weapon. And now, everyone could see it. When the meeting ended, a few neighbors came up to me quietly. "You handled that better than anyone could have," one said. "You didn't yell, didn't lose your cool. You just kept your receipts." I laughed. "Yeah," I said. "Turns out, documentation beats intimidation. And as I walked home that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Because the truth wasn't just on my side anymore. It was official. After the investigation's findings went public, the neighborhood felt different. The air was lighter, as if a weight had finally lifted. People who had been too scared to speak up were suddenly emboldened. I started getting messages from neighbors I barely knew, all sharing their own run-ins with the HOA, fines for minor things, surveillance of their yards, threats of community action for trivial complaints. It quickly became clear, Bob's tyranny wasn't just targeting my family. It was systematic. A small group of us decided to take action. We drafted a petition calling for the removal of the HOA president and demanding a full review of the board's actions. Signatures went up fast. Residents who had previously avoided confrontation were now signing proudly, often adding notes about how long they'd been pushed around. When the next board meeting was scheduled, I knew it would be tense. The community hall was packed. Standing there, seeing familiar faces, neighbors who once avoided eye contact, filled me with a strange mix of pride and anticipation. The president started the meeting with his usual lecture about community values and rule enforcement, but the room wasn't listening anymore. One by one, homeowners started asking questions, calling out inconsistencies, and challenging decisions. It quickly spiraled into chaos. Bob tried to speak over everyone, but it was clear the room had already shifted. I waited my turn, heart steady. When the chair finally nodded at me, I stood and calmly shared our story: the backyard barbecue, the 911 call, the letters, the harassment, and the investigation findings. I spoke plainly, without anger, letting the evidence speak for itself. People nodded, murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, and I could see even some board members looking uncomfortable. By the end of my explanation, the tension in the room had completely flipped. Bob, realizing he had lost control, started stammering. He tried to argue, but every point he made was met with evidence and testimony from neighbors. His confident mask slipped, revealing desperation and panic. Finally, in a flurry of papers and muttered threats, he stormed out of the room. The silence that followed was palpable, a mix of relief and disbelief. The remaining board members looked around, clearly uncertain. One by one, they voted to replace him, agreeing to bring in new leadership and implement mandatory training to prevent future abuse. The petition's momentum carried them forward, and for the first time in years, residents felt they had a real say in their community. As I walked home afterward, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The neighborhood was finally starting to reclaim itself. People were talking, sharing, and laughing again, without the shadow of intimidation hanging over them. For the first time in months, I realized the truth had power, not just to vindicate my family, but to bring the entire community together. Bob was gone. The HOA's grip was loosened. And we'd all learned something important: when enough people stand up calmly, firmly, and with evidence, even the most controlling bully can be held accountable. After the dust settled, life slowly began to feel normal again. The letters stopped coming, the threats vanished, and the police were no longer a part of our backyard BBQs. It was almost surreal to realize that something so small, burgers on a grill, kids playing, a few minutes of music, had caused such chaos, and yet now, that chaos had faded. The new HOA board brought in a breath of fresh air. Rules were simplified, clarified, and communicated respectfully. They held community meetings that actually felt like discussions, not interrogations. People were genuinely listened to, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like a real community rather than a controlled experiment in fear. Neighbors who had quietly endured Bob's tyranny began stopping by just to say thanks. Mrs. Jenkins smiled as she handed me a batch of cookies, and even some younger families waved and called out friendly greetings as I walked Max. It wasn't about recognition or hero status, it was about relief. But still, I couldn't help feeling a quiet pride. Looking back, I realized how close I had come to letting fear silence me. Those letters, the glares, the police at my door, it would have been easy to just give in, hide, and hope the storm passed. But truth, patience, and persistence had won. Documenting everything, staying calm, and asking for help when necessary had turned the tables completely. I often think about that day the HOA called 911. At the time, it felt humiliating and unfair. But now, it feels like a turning point, the moment that revealed their true nature. They called 911 thinking they could scare us, but they only exposed themselves. And with that, the neighborhood could finally breathe again. The fear that had gripped us for months was gone, replaced with confidence, solidarity, and a renewed sense of community. We'd weathered the storm, and the lesson was clear: standing up calmly for what's right can change everything. Looking back on everything that happened, it's wild to realize how quickly a little power can get out of hand. One person with a clipboard and too much authority thought they could control our lives, dictate how we lived in our own home, and even scare a family with the police. It's a stark reminder: power isn't inherently bad, but when it goes unchecked, it can become a weapon. For anyone watching this, here's what I learned: document everything. Every letter, every email, every interaction, keep it organized and clear. Stay calm. Losing your cool is exactly what the bullies want. And most importantly, don't fight fire with fire. Fight it with facts, evidence, and patience. Truth has a weight no intimidation can match. Remember, HOAs exist to serve homeowners, not to control them or wield authority like a weapon. If someone is abusing that power, don't ignore it. Stand up, speak out, and know your rights. It's not just about protecting your property, it's about protecting your peace of mind. And when it comes down to the moment of confrontation, one thing became clear. They tried to use the law to scare my family, but I used the truth to scare them back. As the screen fades to black, imagine slow instrumental music playing. The sun sets over calm lawns, kids laughing in the distance, and on-screen text appears. Know your rights. Protect your home. Stand up to abuse of power. Because in the end, courage, clarity, and a little patience can turn the tables on anyone who thinks they're untouchable.